who were not able to be here last night. Last night we gave a formal introduction to the series, which is entitled, as you see, Spirituality and Personal Development. We also gave a formal introduction to our speaker for the series, Evelyn Marcon. I won't repeat that introduction, but for those of you who were not here, I'd refer you to the back of your little brochure, where you will find a list of Evelyn's achievements, her qualifications, her interests, and her involvements. Those of you who were fortunate enough to be here last night not only heard about Evelyn Marcon in the introduction, but you also experienced her. And you experienced her as one committed to and personally imbued with the principles and practices both of spirituality and therapy. Last night, Evelyn told us, and also showed us in her multimedia presentation, the relationship, or in her own words, the creative interplay between spirituality and therapy. And she drew us, or invited us, to enter into a journey to wholeness. I think she has more to tell us about what that journey would be like, and probably has more challenging words for us. And so I would invite Evelyn now to bring us forward and to address us on the topic, Direction and Jungian Psychology, the Journey to the True Self. Evelyn?
First on the agenda is to see if this is working. Can you hear me at the back? Okay, then I can put this in my pocket. Even though I like using machinery, it makes me very nervous. What I thought I would do today is try to pull some thoughts that I feel are important in terms of using something like a major therapy form in terms of spiritual direction. So one of the challenges was that I needed to do some sifting. And any of you that have done the Myers-Briggs can appreciate this, that if you are an INFP, that's hard to do because you hate giving up anything until the very last minute. And so the very last minute was about 10 minutes ago where I decided to do something else. So I hope it's all right. As Sister Elizabeth stated, that in this session I do want to focus my attention on the journey to the true self. John of the Cross's main thesis is that we enter into the dark night of the soul only to come out seeing daylight. And I hope that this morning that we can give some reflections on what that means in terms of Jungian psychology. One of the other authors that I particularly like in therapy is the works of Virginia Satir, who, just get that straight, who was one of the major frontline people years and years ago in marriage and family therapy. She died a number of years ago, and as usual, when somebody dies, all of their works start to get put down on paper. One of the nice things about Virginia Satir is that she was really moved to work from in here. And being the high intuitive that she was, she did that extremely, extremely well. One of the basic tenets of the Satir model, and she was very experiential therapist, emphasized communications and the ability to be congruent with oneself. But one of the things that she is well known for is the iceberg. And when I first saw this out on print, I thought how similar that was to Carl Jung's format, in which in many places he would refer to that we only operate out of about 1/10 of our potential. And that 1/10 is that conscious level in which we present. The rest of the 9/10 of that iceberg, as it were, is underwater. And I think people who can appreciate water are people like yourselves, where you know you can look out into the ocean and see something there, but you're never sure what the undercurrent is all about. And what Satir did was to spell out a little bit for us what goes on in the undercurrent. And what I liked about her works is that she kind of tried to put a handle, and I don't think this is the finished product. I probably, if I were to come next year, I would add stuff onto this. But I think it does offer us something that on one level we present our behavior here. The other intriguing questions that we need to ask ourselves is what's behind the behavior and what's under the behavior. And she tried to get a handle on that. So she talked in terms of feelings, that on one level I have feelings about who I am, and those feelings are determined by expectations, perceptions, and yearnings, that they're affected by that. And somehow in that first level, there is if you can imagine it, it's like molecules bumping against each other. And as our perceptions and our yearnings and our expectations kind of bounce off of each other, they do create a sense of being, a sense of feeling about who we feel we are. On the second level, what she is saying here, that I'm moving down a wee bit more in terms of my understanding and of myself and of all of these, and I'm moving beyond just self-acceptance, but I have a real sensitivity to the experiences that I constantly am incurring. And so as I meet people and I'm taking in things, that I grow in this kind of sensitivity of understanding this emotional field that is occurring between us. Okay? And when we do that, then we have, in her own words, a different sense of self, a different sense of understanding ourselves as beings. In the third one, she really heightens another dimension, that as we move and develop in this awareness and acceptance and sensitivity to experience on a day-to-day basis, we also come into touch with the deepest yearnings of ourselves. That meaning of life that we want for ourselves. That which gives us energy, that which gives us hope, that which allows us to love. And one of the things that Satir in her own person, if you ever watched videos of her or if you ever met her in the past before her death, one of the things that was very clear is whenever she met you, you knew you were meeting. That's the kind of synchronicity she had. I think Carl Jung was working really strongly towards that. And so what I'd like to do today is highlight a little bit more some of that understanding of his journey towards the true self. For this purpose of this paper, I will be offering a similar paradigm as Satir, but perhaps using different words. And as I see it, spiritual direction and Jungian analytical psychology both point either the directee, if you're using spiritual direction terms, or the client, if you're using therapeutic terms, on the journey toward towards integration. I also propose that spiritual directors can be assisted by what I called a heartfelt understanding, not simply an analytical understanding that occurs here, but it's a heartfelt understanding of Jung's individuation process as well as the process of the spirit. Therefore, I want to spend time uncovering the steps of the inner journey, the journey towards the true self, not for egocentric purposes, but for the care of the soul and for the development of our whole person. And as I like to do usually, since I like stories, symbols, and ceremonies and rituals and so on, I'd like to begin this session again, as I did last night, with a story. This is called The Parable of the Cave. Now, I didn't know Diane was going to take me to see the sea caves, and while I was there and I thought, I should tell this story. And I'm going to leave it to you to place yourself at the sea caves and see what happens within your own inner self. The story is taken from Paula Ripple's work, and in a book. It's a very, very old book. and it's entitled Walking with Loneliness. And I often used it with people that were separated and divorced and moving through that stage of grief. So I'm not even sure if it's in print today, but I still like her stories in it. And this is one of her beautiful stories. The Parable of the Cave. In an ancient time, the challenge of journeying to a place where one might find personal youth was widely known and followed. Equally sought after was an enduring wisdom. And so it was that 3 seers were encouraged to find what had been called the Cave of Wisdom and Life. They made careful preparations for what would be challenging and an arduous journey. When they reached the place of the cave, they noted a guard at the entrance. They were not permitted to enter the cave until they had spoken with the guard. She had only one question for them, and she demanded that they answer only after talking it over with one another. She assured them that they would have a good guide to lead them through the regions of the cave. Her question was a simple one. How far into the cave of wisdom and understanding do you wish to go? The 3 travelers took counsel together and then returned to the guard. Their response was, "Oh, not very far. We just want to go far enough into the cave so that we can say that we've been there." The response of the guard manifested none of her great disappointment as she summoned someone to lead the 3 individuals a short distance into the cave and then watched them set out again after a very short time. Set out to make the journey back to their own land. I think that question is an important question for all of us when we talk about the journey inward. I know myself that I got excited about it initially. Thought, isn't this grand, the journey inward, a lot of energy. But then as I journeyed inward and found some things there, then I got a little bit shy about this and a little bit fearful about it. And often felt like those 3 individuals, well, maybe I'll just go far enough into the cave so that I can tell everybody else, I've been to the sea caves. But nothing else. Exploring the inward journey is similar to the journey taken by those individuals in the parable. All of us want the wisdom and understanding, but not all of us are willing to enter the depth of the cave. Your task today is to let your own personal experience and knowing interact with what I might be saying and showing. That's your step into the cave. That's a journey that you only can do. I can share some reflections about what I've learned, and that's my reflections. How it is integrated into your own, and how you start to name and reflect on your own experience, that's your task. To help you this morning, I'd like to reflect on some, I think, key understandings if we're going to talk about Carl Jung. Some key understandings in terms of analytical psychotherapy. They're not all there, and I think you can appreciate in 45 minutes I've had to make some decisions. But I think some of these are basic understandings. When we talk about analytical psychotherapy, what we're talking about is a process of psychological development which is usually necessitated by some form of suffering. And if you look at your own lives, change really comes when sometimes we are kicked in the butt, right? I mean, we have to move on. Something happens, a critical event, and we change. Whether it's leaving grade 8 to go into high school, whether it's leaving high school to go into university, whether it's making a big change in your life and deciding to go back to university after years and years of not being there, whether it's a career change, whether it's a lifestyle change, whatever that change is, it does necessitate us to look at ourselves. Secondly, there is an attempt to create, by means of a symbolic approach, a dialectic relation between the conscious and the unconscious. And by that, what I mean is that when we're in that stage, what happens is that what is in here that hasn't been spoken or hasn't been identified or hasn't been given airtime in our life wants to come up and wants to be recognized. And so we have this dialogue between what's in our unconscious and what we know. And maybe simplistically, what's unknown and what is known to us starts to move together. Thirdly, there is a focus on the psyche, and a simple, well, not maybe simple, but maybe some definition of what a psyche, purpose of the psyche is that I think what we remember about the psyche is that it is a self-regulating system. In other words, here, if we pay attention, if we let ourselves be and we give attention here, it will seek balance. Now, for Jung, he always talked in terms of the balance of opposites. And so it will seek balance of its own. And for a while, what we may find is a tug-of-war in ourselves, and then we come to another level of homostasis that is different than the homostasis that we had before. All of us like security. We may vote for change, but when the change comes, we fight like... I'll let you finish that. So we like change, but it's difficult because what it means is we need to let go of what we know so that what we know can be brought in by other things that we don't know yet. The psyche seeks balance. And it always moves towards a fuller life of awareness. Now, Carl Jung himself, and I'd like to stay faithful to some of his own quotes in this, if you look at what he valued, and I try to put it as briefly as I can here, but Carl Jung valued two things. He may be turning over his grave hearing me say he valued just two things, but anyways. One was rationality and conscious, that conscious level, that 1/10 of the iceberg that we know, that we can see, that we can identify. And secondly, the realm of the psyche and the unconscious, the other 9/10. He believed, and I particularly like these ones, they're more statements that I found reading his works that really touched me, that the conscious is but a small boat on the vast sea of the unconscious. And as I was looking at some of your fishing boats, I thought of that. And I remember saying to Diane, those boats don't look too sturdy to me. They look awfully small out there. And I think that's part of what happens. That's how it is. We feel like small boats on a vast sea sometimes. Our world is much bigger than we are, and ourselves are much bigger than we think. Secondly, we are not masters of our own, but are ruled by forces and sources of energy operating through us rather than ruled by us. I think if you reflect on your own experience, you can appreciate that statement, because what do we like to do? We like to get a handle on things. We like to organize things. We like to put it in some kind of place where we feel comfortable with it. I remember sharing a desk with someone who had it all over the place, but if you asked her for anything on that desk, she can say, oh, just a minute, scrounge around, get underneath all those papers, here's it. So even in her disorganization, she knew where everything was. We all do that. And we all have a hard time when things fragment, break apart, or we say, is disorganized. My life is not in order. He also goes on to state that these unconscious forces are both destructive and creative. And it's like a warning that if I don't pay attention to them, then they will be destructive to me. That our bodies, our persons, all of us, all that makes us up, wants to be there. And if we don't let ourselves be there, then sickness, dissatisfaction, unhappiness sets in. And finally, that the unconscious for Jung is the sum total of everything repressed and also the wellspring of creativity, guidance, and meaning. In one of his works, he says, confronting the shadow is like refining the gold. And I think he's right on. We can only appreciate the beauty of the gold after it's been refined. He postulated that in addition to the usual instincts of sex, aggression, hunger, and thirst, of which Freud at that time was really high on, he postulated that there is an instinct towards individuation. How does this individuation process work? I think there are a couple of points that help us in looking at, before I go through the stages of individuation. I think these 4 points, in my experience, really help in moving us through the stages of the individuation process. One is knowing my own personal story. Who am I? From my mother's womb to who I am today, what is the sum total of Evelyn? What has been my experience of life, and what sense have I made of that experience? He's very strong about the personal story. Even though I find it a frightening statement, it always causes me to reflect back on the importance of one's story. And these 2 statements do it. He makes 2 important critiques. That even at the age of 83, he is still urging us to take hold of our story, our personal myth. And he's not concerned about the fact that others may believe that myth, or maybe my sister or my brother may have a different myth or story than I have of my experience in that family. But that I believe it is what is essential. And it is that story that I need to tell. He also says that if we don't pay attention to it, he uses an awful word. Derangement comes when that story is not held with respect. So your personal story, to be held with respect and reverence. It's sacred. It's yours. Secondly, that really important is a continual growth towards self-awareness. And thirdly, he talks about an attentiveness. And for Jung, becoming more self-aware of knowing my personal story, he relies on dreams, images, such things as projections, and feelings. Knowing what our feelings are all about and what they're saying to us. In other words, allowing our anger, our grief, our sadness, our guilt, our shame, our joy, our delight, all speak to us. And let them tell us what they're saying. And fourthly, understanding itself the individuation process. So let me unfold some of these principles again. As I indicated last night, crucial to Jung is the individuation process. And as I indicated, so some of this might be repetitious for those of you that were here last night, He saw the process towards individuation a wee bit different than, say, Bowen in the family therapy. What he saw, he didn't talk about emotional cutoffs, although that would be part of it. He didn't talk about the individuation process as understanding the emotional fields. Those are recent terms. How he talked about the individuation process was really getting in touch and understanding what my persona is and unveiling the persona. And maybe a good way to explore that is to maybe give you a little light from my own experience. Because of the way I felt about myself, I spent a lot of years thinking that I was the teacher. And that was the way I got my strokes. And so if there was one person in the classroom that was not paying attention or that tuned me out, my gosh, I would go home and I would wonder, what was wrong? My whole teaching career is down the tubes. Crazy thinking. But there was so much reliance that who I was equal to my position, my status as a teacher, my profession, and that's who I was. And we are all more than our work. The way I've come to say it now is my teaching, my profession is simply an avenue to express things that I have learned. That's all it is. And I don't need it for anything more than that. Secondly, the confrontation with the shadow. And I will be unfolding that a little bit more as we go over and over, okay? I'll be coming back to this. But the shadow is that piece that reflects, it's like looking at yourself in the mirror. And what we see coming back at us, and how we project into that image in the mirror. So it's almost like seeing ourselves there and saying, gee. And usually what we see are those parts that either we don't like, that are still there saying, hey, it's time to pay attention to me now. You've run away with your persona long enough. There's this part of Evelyn that you need to be reintroduced to. So I went through a stage, and for me, facing the shadow was what I called, and you may chuckle about this, and I'll leave you to whatever assumptions you make about this, to your own imagination. But I would say confronting my shadow was confronting the Eve part of Evelyn. And so I would try to hold Evelyn, the professional, and Eve. I mean, that's quite seductive, isn't it? The seduction of the shadows sometimes is very powerful. It's scary. The third stage for Jung is relating to the Animus Anima. For me, it would be relating to the masculine energy. Growing up in my family with two older brothers and being of an Italian culture where the men were, or to be upholded, as my mother would say, that it was very easy for me to be out on the street to compete with my brothers. I know what competition's about. And I was a darn good hockey player on the streets. And I was a darn good baseball player. If they did it, I could do it. I knew what that meant. What I needed to take hold of was that masculine energy that was not only bound up in competition, but that masculine energy that can cut through things, that can be clear, precise. That's what I needed. And I needed to soften within that part that was around that competition and around finding power and place in my own household. And how you get translated or how you need to work with that, that's yours. I come out of my own history. And then finally for him is learning how to center, the centering of oneself. Gretchen Berg talked about at this point the balance between the yin and the yang, of bringing both the opposite energies, the masculine energy and the feminine energy, and being able to hold both of them and making choices from that stance. Let's unfold some of this some more. I like diagrams because they say a lot to me. And I think this says a lot about what happens in life. It starts over here, goes there, and there. I think we can get along in life for a long time, recognizing the fact that this is how I am and this is what I'm going to present. There comes a moment, and for those of you that are of my vintage, might remember the song by Peggy Lee, "Is That All There Is, My Friends?" We come to a point where we say, there's something more here. This is not enough anymore. And things that were solidly intact start to fall apart. And we become upset by that. And we try to get a read on it, and it's kind of elusive at times. And people might say to you, "How come?" And you might say, "Darn it, I just don't know." And I remember one experience in what I call the halls of Marymount. And I was teaching there. I was a department head for second time around. And I was in another department, so another new challenge. And I'd been principal, blah, 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 blah. And I walked down those halls and I thought, it's all finished. It's all finished. It took me a while to know what that meant. I was finished there. And I groped and I grappled with that for a long time. What did it mean? Did it mean I quit my job? Did it mean a career change? Did it mean something else was calling to be recognized within me? What did it mean? Things fall apart. When they fall apart, what starts to happen is that there is a creative tension between the persona who pulls us one way and the shadow that pulls us another. Two different directions. And we feel that tension within us. We feel it in different experiences that we encounter in our everyday actions, in our everyday relationships. We feel the pull. Then we come to a place where we can embrace. And Jung uses the word, we start to befriend our shadow. And we start to hold onto the persona in a different way. And befriending the shadow is really important. For me, it was like learning the computer. And the best illustration is, how do I turn it on? How do I get into Word Perfect? How do I save my document? I was doing a master's thesis, and I lost 67 pages. I thought I saved it. But I think that's like shadow work. Like shadow work. It just kind of disappeared, just moved, became elusive, and I had to begin again to rely on what was here. What was here? The invitation to rely on something deeper than what we know. That shadow can manifest itself in many ways. I like this particular cartoon because it brings it to another light. There's the shadow, and how does it come out? It comes out in what they call Freudian slips. It comes out in these inner dialogues that we have, these inner voices that have a sound of their own and a message and a transcript of their own in our brain. You dumb idiot. Why did you do that? You're not really feminine. Look at you. You're not as gracious as that person. You got to get to the top. Top means success. All those inner voices that invade us and starts to critique us. And of course, in our dreams and in our reactions to others. What might be a situation for this latter part, that reaction to others? One of the most common defenses is what we therapists know as projection. And I think this says it nicely. It could be a complicated term, but I think it says it's that very simply. It's all that unconscious traits, attitudes, feelings that we don't like, that we find hard to own ourselves, that we put out there on everybody else. And it comes out in language like, "You made me angry. Look at her." So the focus is external. Our feelings get projected onto them. Our ideas and assumptions are placed onto them. And in reality, who we're talking about is our very selves. To be able to say, "I am really feeling angry," whenever I experience this kind of interaction, because it reminds me or it draws me back, or because at this very moment I feel the injustice, those are clear statements. And most of us have a long journey to own that, because we've been brought up to put it out there. It's easier and it relieves a lot of tension. Or we get triangled in a relationship to relieve the tension that's occurring between the two major parts. So, projections. I'd like to spend a few moments, because I thought this area might be helpful, is to look at dreams and archetypes and what is the basic underlying principle there. And then I'd like to show a snippet from Fisher-King. Very crucial to understanding the inner world was understanding the images that we have, understanding the dreams that occur during the nighttime or the daytime dreams, and understanding how we relate to certain archetypes in our everyday interaction. The best definition that I have ever found for archetypes was given by Marion Woodman. And she says an archetype is like a magnet. And you know how magnets work. You put the magnet there, and you put a sheet of paper on top of that with iron filings. What happens when you move that magnet? All the iron filings start to reorganize themselves. So where's the power? The power is in the magnet. And the iron filings follow the magnet. The archetype is like a magnet in us. It takes our experiences, it takes what's happening inside and shapes it and forms it in a certain way. And then we have that occurring, we get the readout, as it were, of that in our dreams or in our interactions. I like to make that even a little bit more practical. So I'd like to show one piece of the Fisher-King. And I've set it where for those of you that have seen it, where Robin Williams, who is in this, maybe I should just explain a little bit of the story. The story begins where Robin Williams loses his wife, who is shot down in a restaurant right before him. And the gun person who did it on the urging of a disc jockey who made a flippant comment, and this person, who was a little bit troubled at the time, interpreted the comment one way. So he goes into the restaurant and he shoots a bunch of people. One of the persons that he shoots is Robin Williams' wife. As a result, Robin Williams has a psychotic break. He's in psychiatry for a long period of time, and then he goes out and he's on the streets. He lives on the streets. The radio announcer, out of, in his own words, a sense of indebtedness, in a sense of guilt, and a sense of trying to find his own well-being, tries to help Robin Williams. And in this scene, you have them in the park, lying on the grass, and Robin Williams has a brief moment where he finds himself again. And he tells a story of something that he used to teach himself in university. And the story of the Fisher-King unfolds. What I'm going to ask you to do is to listen to the story of the Fisher-King and let your own self, not to worry about having the right answer, I wonder what the books say about this. But can you let the myth speak to you? And then I'm going to invite you to just share that with your neighbor, okay? What you got out of the story. If you find that, if you don't want to and you're feeling that you're more into it and you want to journal some stuff down on your paper, that's all right for me. It's fine, but the extroverts may want to talk about it, the introverts just may want to be by themselves. So however you're drawn, God bless you, okay? You're there, so just in case I do something wrong with this thing here. It's as high as I can get it.
Dead, his companion was naked. My companion is insinuating. Probably boosted the sales of my biography, though, the public. There's a fascination with celebrity murders that fall nakedness, bastards.
Yeah. I may be going out on a limb here, but you don't seem like a happy camper. Ever heard the story of the Fisher King?
No.
Begins with the king as a boy. Then he spends the night alone in the forest to prove his courage so he can become king. Now while he's spending the night alone, he's visited by a sacred vision. Out of the fire appears the Holy Grail, symbol of God's divine grace. The voice said to the boy, "You shall be keeper of the Grail so that it may heal the hearts of men." The boy was blinded by greater visions of a life, power, glory, and beauty. He stayed in radical amazement. He felt for a brief moment how much a boy. God.
I can't give it. It doesn't go any higher, I'm sorry. Oh, good idea. Where would I put it?
As the boy grew older, his wound grew deeper. Until one day, life for him lost its reason. Himself. Couldn't love. He was sick with experience. He began to die. One day, Coll wandered into the castle and found the king alone.
Okay.
He was simple-minded. He didn't see a king.
I hear when he was the word companion, that's so insinuating. Public boosts the sales of my biography, though the public has a fascination with celebrity murders that involve nakedness, bastards.
Jack, I may be going out on a limb here, but you don't seem like a happy camper. Did you ever hear the story of the Fisher King?
No.
Begins with the king as a boy, having to spend the night alone in the forest to prove his courage so he can become king. Now while he's spending the night alone, he's visited by a sacred vision. Out of the fire appears the Holy Grail, symbol of God's divine grace. And a voice said to the boy, "You shall be keeper of the Grail so that it may heal the hearts of men." But the boy was blinded by greater visions of a life filled with power, glory, and beauty. And in this state of radical amazement, he felt for a brief moment not like a boy, but invincible, like God. So he reached in the fire to take the Grail, and the Grail vanished, leaving him with his hand in the fire to be terribly wounded. Now as this boy grew older, his wound grew deeper, until one day, life for him lost its reason. He had no faith in any man, not even himself. He couldn't love or feel loved. He was sick with experience. He began to die. One day, a fool wandered into the castle and found the king alone. Now being a fool, he was simple-minded. He didn't see a king. He only saw a man alone and in pain. And he asked the king, "What ails you, friend?" The king replied, "I'm thirsty. I need some water to cool my throat." fool took a cup from beside his bed, filled it with water, handed it to the king. As the king began to drink, he realized his wound was healed. He looked in his hands, and there was the Holy Grail, that which he sought all of his life. He turned to the fool and said with amazement, "How could you find that which my brightest and bravest could not?" The fool replied, "I don't know. I only knew that you were thirsty." It's very beautiful, isn't it? I think I heard that at a lecture once. I don't know. Professor, that hot. Very.
Livestock, so the knights could go out there and get grails and slaughter villages with a clear head, huh? I mean, where would King Arthur be without Guinevere, huh?
Happily married, probably.
I couldn't resist. I'd like you just for a few moments to, okay, put this in my pocket, okay. Very obedient to machinery. If you spend a few moments just recalling what the myth was, the interaction between the two men, when the story was being told, what happened to Jeff Bridges? Then when he had that flashback again of this common image of this knight, all red, what would you make of that? So you just do some free association with what you heard and what you saw. I'd like to give you a long period of time, but we are moving on here. So how about a few minutes doing that, okay? Just do some debriefing of that. It would be important to share to the whole group, not necessarily ask questions about it, but something that was an insight or something that it reminded you of, or something that there's an energy bit. Anyone want to share any of that? It's a very open-ended type of sharing. No one? Okay. What I was just aware of as you people were talking about, it was the energy of this room. When stories are told, they have a power of their own. When we reach into some of the older stories, they really have a power of their own. That as you saw there, Jeff Bridges almost became transformed. He got taken into the story. And Robin Williams was very much moved by the story. And in one way, asking himself for a cup of water. Stories do that. They hit us on many levels. What hits you may not hit someone else. It's the power of the story, the power of myths. In spiritual direction, what I find really helpful is that when people come in and they want to use their dreams, or they want to use their feelings, or they want to use incidences that have occurred during the day, then what I am aware of as a spiritual director are the levels in which these things speak to us. If it's their dreams, I work with a very simple format. People like Faraday, Taylor, wrong, that was a movie star, Freudian Slipping. Taylor has excellent books on it, but a simple format that I use is, where were you in that dream? Were you passive? Were you actively engaged? When did this dream occur? Is it a dream of years ago? I remember having a dream where I was transported, and I was an ancient native woman squatting down, giving birth to a child. It was a very powerful dream for me. It did not take place in the 19th century. It's a very powerful dream that has much more to it than personal. That's moving into what Jung would say, the collective unconscious. So what was the time? Where is this dream taking place? In a desert, on a dentist chair, in your backyard, in a home, in a big factory? Where is this dream taking place? Who are the other persons in the dream? Are they men only? Are they women only? Are they both women and men? Are you running? Are you terrified? Are you rejoicing? What's happening in that dream? Who are the others? And sometimes in a dream, the objects that are there in the dream are excruciating, are just as important as the people. I remember in my dream being chased because I witnessed something, and I took the gun that was used and I hid it under my ring. That's how ridiculous dreams could be. But the ring was important. It was big enough to hide this object. So don't let things in the dream fool you. Some people say that you can free associate with them. Other people use the language, what do those people say to you in the dream? And as you dialogue with them in your journal, what are they saying to you now? When you think about the ring, what is it a symbol of? What influence does this ring have on you in your own life? The other thing that I am very conscious of, that one dream is not enough. And the way I like to explain it very simply is, it's like if you're going to appreciate grapes, you have to eat the whole bunch. And dreams are like that. You have to deal with the dreams like a bunch. And then you say, what is this bunch saying to me? And so oftentimes in my own personal life as well as with those that I'm working with, I will say, go back and review your dreams. Now tell me what you sensed was the main message, or what was the key message, or what do you sense coming out of all of those dreams that you need to integrate in your own life. So that's some ways that we use dreams. Jung also became aware of the fact that if we can be still enough and let our unconscious flow and our minds flow, that we will have a lot of images. And those images are also very important to us. I think what I'd like to do is maybe make one motion or one statement, is that feminists have critiqued Jungian work and have critiqued it in the terms of stereotyping men and women, the male and the female. And I could tell by the energy of the room, by the last comments of women are good for you. You're on to that, so I won't say any more. I think when you read his works and works of Marion Woodman, who I think has really captured what he was trying to say then, is that he's talking about energy. He uses the word as propensities, that kind of word to indicate what the archetypes are about. He is of his time. And so I would say for yourselves is to be aware of what you do know today and not allow stereotypical and cultural norms impact on your dreams. Okay? I don't have time to say any more than that. And finally, I just like to end. I'm far beyond the time allotted. So I'd like to end with this. It's called a moment's meditation. And I'm sorry to say that when I found this, I never did record where I got it from, but I know it's from Carl Jung. And I'd like to read a bit of his meditation, a meditation that he wrote himself. To accept oneself as one is may sound like a simple thing. But simple things but simple things are always the most difficult to do. In actual life, to be simple and straightforward is an art itself that requires the greatest discipline, while the question of self-acceptance lies at the root of the moral problem and at the heart of a whole philosophy of life. Is there ever a doubt in my mind that it is virtuous to give alms to the beggar, to forgive him who offends me? Yes, even to love my enemy in the name of Christ? No, not once does such a doubt cross my mind, certain as I am that what I have done unto the least of my brethren, I have done unto Christ. But what if I should discover that the least of the brethren, the poorest of all beggars, the most insolent of all offenders, yes, even the very enemy himself or herself, that these live within me, that I myself stand in need of alms, of my own kindness, that I am to myself the enemy who is to be loved. What then? Then the whole Christian truth is turned upside down. Then there is no longer any question of love and patience. Then when we say raka to the brother or sister within us, then we condemn and rage against ourselves. For sure, we hide this attitude from the outside world, but this does not alter the fact that we refuse to give the least among the lowly in ourselves with open arms. And if it had been Christ himself to appear within ourselves in such a contemptible form, we would have denied him 1,000 times before the cock had crowed, even once. I'd like to thank you for your attention, for your energy this morning, and ask you to be mindful of your dreams, of your stories, and to be gentle with yourselves.
Evelyn will take a few questions. I think we may have about 15 minutes at the most.
Sure.
Miss, please. Yes, I would ask you to go to the mics, please.
Evelyn, when you talk about spiritual direction in relation with Jungian psychology, I'm aware that the word direction kind of doesn't fit into Jungian psychology. And I think he used the word or the term midwife. And it seems to me that to say a few words about that would help us a lot to see it as a little bit different, in fact, a lot different than direction.
Yes, that's beautiful. And maybe, would you like to share with me, come and share some thoughts on midwifery that you've learned? Am I putting, you're not? No, I'm not. Look at that. I'm glad. Good. Because I think we both can do a little bit of justice about this.
Yeah, I just think that the idea of giving birth to the true self is a process very much alike giving birth to a baby. And you don't have to do a lot except care for the baby that's in process of birth. And if I can see myself as one who is a midwife and just facilitating that, allowing something to happen that nature already has in mind.
Yes. I don't even want to touch that. Said beautifully. I said beautifully. Yes. And it's a very important point because in spiritual direction, it's more of a facilitation than doing therapy. There's a different action, a different stance. I think a different sacred ground that has occurred, that is developed between the director and the directee. And midwifery is a beautiful concept that just pulls it all together. Okay? Thank you. Anyone else?
Dr. Markham, I'm enjoying your lectures. I have a question. I hear the term aminus, how did, aminus, amina and aminus?
Yes.
And I would like to understand what kind of characteristics you might look for in terms of individual, one's own personal development, and also if you're working with someone else, how you could kind of help them journey through that. I just don't think my own knowledge has reached that level at this time to understand that.
Okay. Do you mind standing before me here, if I may use your maleness, your masculine? There's some things best described by concrete objects, right? There are two forces that, and I'm going to use Marion Woodman's language, there are two energies within all of us. I represent one type of energy. He represents another type of energy. Those energies, we both need them. So in myself, I have this part. It's there. I need to know what that energy represents for me. It has two sides of it, and maybe more than that, but I'm going to make this as simple. There's a positive energy of the masculine and a negative energy of the masculine. What I sense here is there's nice positive energy here. And within us, how we view this energy or how we experience this energy does take us back to even before we were born. I'm a very firm believer, and I may have people that don't believe this, but my own experience tells me that the time in the womb is just as powerful as the time coming out and living for X number of years after that. How I've experienced this energy is through the experience of my family, my father, my brothers, my mother, how she integrated this part of herself, how she didn't integrate that part of herself. Okay? When I'm able to use this force positively, then I can bring about some form of clarity, some clearness of decision. It's like an eagle. It's my perception. It's like an eagle that can cut through stuff. And I think that's the positive force of the masculine. Marion Woodman says that the masculine is that positive spirit force within us. Okay? Where it's disruptive, where if there's abuse in the family, where males have suffered a lot themselves, and then we reap the ramifications of that, then we may experience this in a different fashion. We may, in some ways, experience it as overpowering. It becomes very big. And so what I see is bigness. What I see maybe are only the feet, and I can't see anything else. This smallness puts me in a very vulnerable and frightening type of position. Okay? So part of my job as a woman is to look at my experiences. And so, for example, in dreams, if males are always running after me, or I'm always rushing to get rid of them in my dreams, they're black figures, then you know that there's a negative masculine that I need to look at. Okay? So some of the questions there would be, what does that remind you of? When did you feel like that before in your life? All right? So that's dealing with the opposite energy. Okay? For the male, the same thing. They need this positive feminine energy. And for them, because of their experiences of the feminine, which might be through their father who never integrated the positive feminine, it may be through their mother, okay? So that nurturing part of the man is a very fearful piece, softness, as well as that nurturing piece that brings one into fullness, tenderness, all right? They go through the same thing as we do. And for them, if they're having dreams of, for many men, it would be seeing more like Marilyn Monroe figures or fantasizing trying to find for themselves, or maybe even shrinking, being afraid of being with a woman. That's the negative part. When they integrate the positive, then they are okay. There's a congruency within themselves. All right? It's a little short, but I think that's what I could do this morning. I really appreciate this. Thank you. Thank you.
When you mentioned about the rebirth of the new self, could you comment on the process that a person has to go through at that point in their journey to find the family that goes with this rebirth? Because sometimes the people they're in relationship with are not accepting of that new person.
There are, it's a difficult question to give, because already in my mind there are three options. Like the most recent, there's the imago therapy that work with couples to do that, and so the therapy focuses on helping couples to nurture one another in that, and so that's one process of that when both are willing to do that. When an individual, and it's not uncommon for either the male or the female, for women or for men, sometimes the partner is simply not able to do that, and we ask too much of them sometimes to be there when they can't. When that happens, then maybe something like psychoanalytical therapy, which moves towards the inner child work, is really important. One of the principles that I like following is that I don't like to bring people back to inner child work unless I can bring them to a new step later on. That's been recent. Yvonne Dolan and many people like her really have been bringing that to our attention. At one time, everyone thought you had to go through the whole bloody thing over and over and over again. And what we're learning is we don't. So I would say be gentle with yourself in that. I would like to maybe just share from my own personal experience, and you're going to have to find out what's going to suit you and fit you. And so you may need to do some searching out later on about this. But I know for years, one of the things that was very personal to me is the fear that I would have. And when I got fearful, I would lose my breath, have a hard time breathing. And it was only after my mother's death and talking to my mother's sisters when I started to talk to my aunts and got the story that when I was born, I had a hard time coming out. And when I did come out, I was constantly vomiting blood. And in that, I was gagging, and then I was put immediately into an incubator. And part of that knowing made sense about something I went through in therapy. That oftentimes I felt like I was in an incubator, I was grasping for my breath, and then I saw, oh, there's a physical reason for that. It had nothing to do with abuse. It had nothing to do with somebody being awful. It had a lot to do with the circumstances of my birth. Now, I went through that with a therapist who was able to help me use my imagination to go back there. And this time we did it in a group. 2 people volunteered, and there was what we call family reconstruction that occurred. Okay? So I hesitate to say more. I think sometimes we need someone to help us go there. And I think to depend on our closest friends is not the healthiest thing at times, because they have their own material to go through, and I think it asks a lot sometimes. It's about all I can say at this time. I know it's not sufficient, but I think it's best I not say more. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Now I can unplug, eh?
Thank you, Evelyn, and thank you for your attention. I would invite those of you who are able to do so to return this afternoon to hear much more enlightening and stimulating discussion by Evelyn on the topic, Integrating a Feminist Theology, One Woman's Journey. And I presume that what Evelyn has to say will not only be helpful to the women in the audience. So we'll see you at 2 o'clock in the same place. Thank you.